She once slept in the dark corners beneath bridges over the Mississippi, where rats and humans fought for scraps of straw. He lived on the 72nd floor of a skyscraper in downtown Chicago, looking down on the world like a god of technology. They didn't belong to the same universe, but one small mechanical failure opened that universe, and two people from opposite extremes collided, like a meteor crashing into a meadow. He had everything: power, money, and adoration. She had nothing but a torn backpack and eyes that refused to bow. No one could have guessed that she would be the one to end his reign with a wounded smile and a truth too unforgivable. From the rooftop of the Glass Point Tower, where sunlight pierced through massive glass walls as if tearing holes in Chicago's gray sky, Ethan Caldwell looked down at the city he called his empire. At 43, he was the man senators called by his first name. With more than $10 billion to his name, Ethan wasn't just a founder. He symbolized technocratic might, technology, power, and control fused into one. That morning, he wore a sky-blue shirt tailored by an Italian artisan. A Greubel Forsey worth $500,000 ticked on his wrist, each chime reminding him that time was not something he endured, it was something he owned. The only thing he could never buy was peace when he looked in the mirror. In the penthouse kitchen, a woman prepared coffee. Amara Daniels, his wife, emerged with her natural curls and a caramel silk robe. She had once been the woman who made Ethan cry the first night he admitted exhaustion. But now, to him, she was like a classical symphony he had played too often, beautiful, but no longer stirring. "Your coffee's getting cold." Her voice was gentle, but not submissive. Ethan didn't turn around. "I'll be right there," he lied, out of reflex. He no longer loved her. They both knew it. Neither spoke it aloud. Flashback. 5 years earlier, on a snowy night, a limousine had carried Ethan through Englewood, a neighborhood most CEOs told drivers to avoid. But that night, the car broke down. Ethan walked along the street and saw her. She sat on a concrete step, giving the last of her sandwich to a trembling veteran. No hesitation, no need for recognition. Ethan froze, disarmed by something he couldn't understand. Compassion without conditions. A foreign feeling. A humanity absent from any balance sheet. They talked until dawn about politics, street philosophy, dignity in poverty, and the cold indifference of society. Amara never asked for anything. She even teased him about his polished shoes. That made him feel naked and real. Back to the present. Amara was not the woman investors or glossy magazines expected him to marry. But that had once been why he chose her. Her presence in his life was a quiet revolution. They married within 6 months. Forbes, Vogue, and even CNN ran headlines. "Chicago's most powerful man marries former homeless woman." Amara hated it. Ethan used it to scrub his image after a data manipulation scandal. Yet in those first 2 years, their love was real. She softened his edges. He funded community clinics. She urged him to pay fair wages. Ethan had once looked into the mirror and seen himself, not the shadow of power, but the light dimmed. When the company hit a $75 billion IPO, Ethan changed not overnight, but in thousands of nods to flattery, hundreds of sugar-coated emails, and martinis shared with women who didn't carry his last name. The silent fracture. "You're still considering the investor meeting in Austin, right?" Amara asked, handing him almond butter toast, his favorite. "Yeah. They're pushing hard on the data transition," he said. It was his 8th lie that week. The Austin trip had ended 2 weeks earlier. He had been meeting someone at the Street Regis Chicago, on the street where he'd once met Amara. She didn't press further. She never checked his phone, never scanned receipts. That trust made betrayal easier. Breakfast in silence. They sat at a dining table big enough for 20, but there were only 2, and a silent wealth couldn't fill. A text flashed across his phone. His face softened. "Last night was wild. I'm still shaking." He deleted it immediately, but when he looked up, Amara's eyes were already on him, reading the creases in his soul. She didn't ask. "Trouble at the office," she said. "Some staffing contract issues." She smiled faintly. "I made walnut pancakes, the ones you used to call my wife's flavor." Ethan didn't smile. He sliced through the pancake with unnecessary force. The butter and syrup smelled foreign, like a memory left behind. Maybe we should go to Vermont next week. The old bed and breakfast for our 2nd anniversary, he remembered. That was the last time he looked at his wife and thought, I chose right. Can't. Boston expansion deadline. I understand. She nodded, as always. The sunlit apartment felt colder than desert sand. Ethan rose when his phone rang. This time it was real but not urgent. Just another excuse to escape the suffocating stillness of a home where his wife tried to hold together something he no longer wanted. From his office, he saw Amara clearing plates. She moved softly, carefully, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. He should have felt tenderness. Instead, he felt irritation. Why doesn't she leave? Why is she still kind? Why does she make me feel guilty with just a look? In that moment, Ethan Caldwell was no longer the man who loved a homeless girl. He was an empty-hearted man, unaware of the price it would demand. Not everyone is born to destroy an empire. Some are born to replace it and do it better. Sierra Vaughn from Houston didn't enter Ethan's life like a breeze. She arrived like a scheduled hurricane. No detours, no wrong targets, nothing accidental. She first met Ethan Caldwell at an exclusive tech summit in Dallas, where invitations came in silver ink envelopes and guests passed 3 layers of biometric security. Ethan was the keynote speaker. Sierra introduced herself as a strategic consultant, a vague title reserved for women with power no one had fully mapped. In the glass-walled hall, Sierra sat in the 3rd row, wearing an emerald dress cut low in the back. Not indecent, but impossible to ignore. She didn't take notes. She didn't snap photos. She just watched straight into Ethan's eyes as he spoke about turning data into cognitive control. Her half-smile made him stumble in his speech, the first time he had lost control on stage. She approached him afterward in the VIP lounge. A glass of 18-year scotch in hand, her gaze sharp as a scalpel. No pleasantries, no flirtation, just one line. You're wasting your potential on things that are too safe. Ethan laughed, but his eyes lingered on the silk collar of her blouse. The dinner invitation came less than an hour later. They dined at a French restaurant Ethan had once sworn off after the head chef's scandal. This time, he returned because the chef had changed, and because of the woman across the table. Dinner was not seduction. It was surgery. Sierra dissected his company structure with a precision that would take his chief of staff 3 weeks to piece together. She pointed out 3 weaknesses in his international investment model, none of which his board had noticed. Then she delivered the cut. Your problem isn't ethics. Your problem is that you still believe ethics are mandatory. That's your weakness. Ethan couldn't remember the last time anyone had made him listen. Not just look, not just assess. Listen. He absorbed every cadence, every pause in her voice. Sierra wasn't Instagram beautiful. She had the beauty that made men feel smaller, desperate to conquer her, to prove they still could. 3 days later, she had a $650,000 consulting contract. 2 weeks later, a private office on the 19th floor of Caldwell Systems. A month later, clearance was made to the penthouse, once reserved for Ethan and Amara. Ethan believed he was in control. He thought the nights when Sierra leaned on his shoulder in the office, sharing bourbon and global data policy, were controlled intimacy. He thought the first kiss was a slip. He thought their first night together at the Pendry Hotel was unplanned. Sierra, of course, thought otherwise. Every message was backed up, and every night is recorded. Every conversation is encrypted and stored on a hard drive labeled Opus. Ethan Caldwell, locked in a bank vault in Austin. She memorized his breathing when he told the truth and lied. She watched his eyes flicker toward the screen each time Amara called on FaceTime, and he couldn't answer. She knew guilt lived in him, but courage had died. And she knew time was hers because men like Ethan always chose the woman who made them feel powerful, not the one who made them feel human. When Amara slept, Ethan texted. When Amara invited him to dinner, he claimed business travel. When Amara suggested adoption if they couldn't conceive, he replied, "We're still young." That night, he went to a rented loft in Lincoln Park, where Sierra opened the door in an oversized white shirt, half-buttoned. She never told him she loved him. She only said, "I don't want anything from you. I want to see you live, like the man you keep hiding. Ethan believed her, and belief made him blind to the game, where he was just a pawn temporarily promoted to queen, destined to be sacrificed. 3 months later, Amara planned a party at the penthouse to announce important news. Ethan nodded without listening, thinking about Sierra and on a fake Boston trip. When Sierra received the invitation, she wasn't surprised. She slipped on a red dress. She knew who Amara was and never once saw her as a threat. To Sierra, a wife was static. She was the variable. Ethan saw Sierra walk in, and in that moment, Amara stepped to the microphone. Morning in Chicago was veiled in a thin mist over its skyline. The early March sun slipped through the bathroom window, where Amara Daniels sat frozen, clutching the pregnancy test that trembled in her hand in sync with her racing heart. 2 pink lines, clear, unmistakable, her palm pressed to her stomach, the same hands once numb from sleeping under bridges near the South Side train stop, now touching where life had begun. A seed of hope wrapped in fragile cells that Ethan had left behind, whether by accident or intent. Amara did not cry, but a faint yet undeniable smile broke through the storm of doubt. She had thought herself unable to conceive after many failed attempts. They had seen doctors. Ethan had shown disappointment, but never blamed her. She remembered when he said, "If we never have a child, just you is enough." She had believed it then. Now, she wasn't so sure. She stepped out of the bathroom, her gaze lingering on the space beside the bed where Ethan should have been on a Sunday morning. But he had left the night before, claiming an early meeting at the Evanston data center, a lie he no longer cared to polish. Amara didn't question him. She had learned silence. Every question only widened the gap, and she had stepped back far enough. Instead of confrontation, she created a moment Ethan could not ignore. A dinner, a celebration. Not just to announce her pregnancy, but as one last attempt to save a marriage unraveling at its seams, she decided to host it at their penthouse. Not one of the grand galas with guests plucked from LinkedIn and Forbes, but an intimate dinner with real friends, people who had witnessed their love, not just those who knew Ethan as a CEO in Armani. Amara hired a boutique event firm, insisting on elegance with warmth. Golden candlelight, soft acoustic music, a menu of dishes Ethan had chosen during their first dinner in West Loop. She selected an olive green, flowing, understated dress concealing her still small belly while letting her radiance hint at something sacred. She asked the band to play "At Last" by Etta James at the moment of her speech, the same song Ethan had played when he proposed with a sapphire ring instead of a diamond, saying, "It matches your eyes better." 3 weeks of preparation passed like a carefully composed score. Ethan seemed indifferent. He asked about the guest list, nodded at some names, but slipped in others. She didn't know international investment partners, he said. Amara did not doubt him, but inside, something cracked, like tempered glass, struck too hard. The morning of the dinner, Ethan was gone again. She called. He said he was in a meeting, another lie. Still, she steadied herself. She placed a hand on her stomach in the mirror, smiling like a goddess before a shrine, though she knew the evening would feel more like a ritual without divinity. When the guests arrived, Amara descended the staircase like a Midwestern muse, hair pinned softly, lips touched only with gloss. She embraced old friends, former colleagues from the homeless shelter, journalists who had first written about their improbable love. She thanked each one. Ethan arrived 20 minutes late. Black suit, open collar shirt, eyes scanning for something or someone that was not his wife. Amara noticed, but revealed nothing. His hand on her waist was cold metal. She felt the truth he would not say. Then Sierra Vaughan walked in. Amara had never met her, but she knew instantly, not because of the blood-red dress that blazed against the golden lights, but because of the look Ethan gave her. And the look Sierra returned, an undeniable secret shared in silence. "Who is she?" Amara whispered to Rebecca, an old friend from her community center days. "They say she's his new strategic consultant, but rumor is she works very closely with Ethan." Very closely? In every way. The world blurred for Amara. Laughter, jazz, candlelight, all muffled as though behind frosted glass. Yet she walked to the center of the room, lifted her glass, and spoke. "Thank you, everyone. for coming tonight. Ethan and I, we have something special to share. Something we've waited so long for. Something small, yet powerful. Ethan looked at her. In his eyes was not excitement, but dread because he had no idea. Amara laid her hand on her stomach. We're having a baby. No applause came, because just then from by the pool Sierra slipped. A sharp cry, a sudden fall, and Amara, standing close to the water's edge, was pulled in with her. Two women plunged into the freezing pool, one carrying a child, the other holding a sin. The sound of water erupting was like a gunshot through the banquet. Every conversation, every note of music, every clink of glass froze as two bodies plunged into the infinity pool beyond the glass railing on the 72nd floor. A red dress floated like blood on the surface. An olive-green dress sank, dragging its wearer toward the bottom. Amara did not scream, could not. Her first instinct was to clutch her stomach, even as water rushed into her mouth, nose, and lungs. Her head slammed against the pool wall, and light shattered into 1,000 stars. High heels dragged her down like stones. The fabric of her carefully chosen dress wrapped around her legs like a net. She tasted chlorinated water mixed with the sweetness of maple syrup, which was still lingering on her tongue. Sweet, then bitter. She knew she was dying. For a fleeting second, she looked upward. The surface blurred, broken with fractured reflections of terrace lights. A figure dove in, strong, quick, decisive. She smiled faintly, believing Ethan had chosen, believing that, at last, after everything, he had chosen family. But then she saw him swim past her, straight towards Sierra. Ethan never saw his wife sinking, never saw her hand reaching upward, like a child drowning in a bathtub. He swam for his mistress, whose red dress had slipped away, whose hair fanned out like ribbons of blood in the water. He wrapped his arms around Sierra, lifted her head above the surface, pressed her to his chest, and stroked her hair with a tenderness Amara had not felt in 2 years. His breath was ragged, his voice trembling. "You're safe. I've got you." Amara did not rise. The light above shrank to a pinpoint. Her heart pounded like war drums. The child, her child, was swimming in the same dark water, in the same suffocating silence. She did not cry. She felt only stillness, until another arm, warm, firm, unwavering, came around her from behind, pulled her up, tore her from death's grip. It was not her husband. Julian Hart, the attorney she had been introduced to only once, was a guest of Rebecca's. He had stripped off his jacket and leather shoes, diving in when no one else moved. When he saw that Ethan, the man lauded for philanthropy, had chosen to save only one. On the deck, chaos reigned. Shouts, gasps, music still played, grotesquely unfitting. A few guests dialed emergency services. None had jumped. Water exploded as Julian surfaced, hauling Amara into his arms, keeping her head clear of the stone steps. She coughed violently, water spurting from her mouth like blood. Her skin shook in small tremors, her wide eyes opening, and the first thing she saw was not Julian, not the night sky, but Ethan, kneeling beside Sierra, fingers pressed to her wrist, whispering words, his forehead against hers. Not once did he look at his wife. "She's pregnant," Rebecca's voice screamed. "Amara is pregnant, you bastard." Julian lifted Amara from the pool, laying her gently onto the marble deck. He searched for blankets, barked for help, his eyes sharp as knives. He said nothing to Ethan. He didn't need to. He had seen enough. Ethan never moved. When the paramedics arrived, Ethan insisted that Sierra be taken first. One EMT asked, "And the other woman, the black woman she fell in too?" Ethan nodded dismissively. "Someone's already with her." No inquiry, no concern, not a single glance at Amara. Julian climbed into the ambulance with her. On the road to Northwestern Memorial, Amara's hand clutched his. "If it had just been me, I would have died." Julian said nothing. He only held her tighter. And in his silence, a prosecution was already being written. The emergency maternity ward at Northwestern Memorial smelled like every hospital corridor. Antiseptic, bleach, and something colder, nameless, the scent of hopes kept behind sealed doors. Here, the most fragile lives were welcomed. Here, too, Countless souls vanished before they ever had the chance to cry. Amara Daniels lay motionless on a hospital bed draped in white that looked more like a shroud than linen. An IV line trembled against her weakening pulse. A fetal monitor flickered beside her, lights blinking faintly, erratic, uncertain. In the corridor, Julian Hart sat upright on a hard plastic chair, his shirt still damp from the pool, his eyes sharper than any doctor's in the building. He had called in his own physician to oversee her care. He had tried to reach family, but she had none. Amara had survived on her own from the south side streets to the pinnacle of Caldwell Tower, and she was still alone when her husband left her at the bottom of cold water. Any family yet? The nurse, a Haitian woman with weary eyes, asked softly. No, Julian replied. I'll sign whatever forms are needed. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. At least she has someone willing to stand here. Unlike her husband, Dr. Meredith Chang, lead physician on duty, walked out with a thick file, her face heavy with what she carried. Mr. Hart? I'm afraid we have difficult news. Julian rose, his back rigid. Miss Daniels lost the baby, roughly 12 weeks. We couldn't keep the heartbeat after she went into an acute seizure. Too much water in the lungs, combined with trauma and prolonged oxygen deprivation. Julian swallowed hard. He was not a man who often lost command of his emotions, but fury coiled around his throat like barbed wire. And her husband? His voice nearly broke into a growl. He never came. We called the number on file. No answer. 2 hours later, Amara stirred. Her eyes opened to a ceiling so white it stung a funeral cloth stretched overhead. She didn't need to ask. She knew. Her hand moved to her belly, reflexive, maternal, but inside emptiness. My baby? Julian did not look away. He had no right to lie. We couldn't keep it, Amara. She turned her face aside. Silent. No sobs, no tears. But the silence quaked like an earthquake. Julian had seen clients break down during divorce proceedings, and men roar when stripped of custody. But he had never seen anyone grieve like this with silence, so profound it forced others to ache for her. Did he come? She whispered. No. I thought, at least for the baby, he would come. Julian said nothing. His eyes said everything. Amara closed her eyes. 1 minute. 2. When she opened them again, something inside her had changed. That night, Ethan arrived. The shirt was pressed, and the cologne was faint under the stench of liquor. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, not from sleeplessness, but too much scotch. Amara? She turned her face to the window. Are you all right? No reply. Julian stepped forward, his frame a wall between them. You're 18 hours late. She's my wife. And the baby was your child, Julian said, voice like a blade. And you didn't choose it. Ethan froze. An apology would have been obscene. An excuse, meaningless. Finally, Amara turned back. Her eyes locked on the man who had once been her entire world. Do you know what I thought when I was sinking? He said nothing. I thought finally you had chosen me. I was wrong. Her voice held no rage, only exhaustion, bottomless and final. You chose a woman whose name I'd never known. You chose her, in front of me, in front of our child. And now I have nothing. But you, Ethan, you will lose everything. He stood there, hollow, a fool in $1,000 suit on a battlefield of ashes. Regret was no longer a feeling. It was a sentence. That night, Amara drafted divorce papers. Julian signed as a witness. But in her heart, another verdict was written, one larger than divorce, larger than loss, larger than love itself. She was no longer a betrayed wife. She was a survivor, and survivors like her do not forgive. 1 week after leaving the hospital, Amara Daniels returned to her penthouse for the last time, not to forgive, not to cling. She came to the end of it. Her fingerprints still opened the doors, and the censors recognized her as Mrs. Daniels. But the woman they identified had drowned with her unborn child in the pool that night. The one who crossed the marble foyer now was colder, sharper, with nothing left to lose. She carried no suitcase, only a thick folder, an encrypted drive, and a man at her side, Julian Hart, attorney and now keeper of the truth she had once feared to face. Ethan wasn't home. She knew his schedule better than he did. Today, he was in D.C., sitting in a closed-door meeting with policy advisors, discussing legislation to legalize citizen data access for national security purposes. The irony is that the man who once sold data for power is now hailed as an ethics advisor. In Amara's hands lay the complete records of Caldwell Systems' buried deals, shell transactions, defense contracts masked as research grants, billions shifted offshore. She hadn't uncovered them herself. They came from Sierra Vaughan. Anonymous. Encrypted link. No explanation. No note. Amara understood. It was Sierra's way of closing the circle. Sierra had thought she was Amara's replacement until Ethan froze her contract 2 weeks after the pool incident. No thanks. No goodbye. The woman who believed she controlled the game had been discarded like a pawn. And so, she chose an alliance with the woman she once wanted erased. The enemy of my enemy had become a witness. Julian set his laptop on the dining table where Ethan and Amara had once celebrated anniversaries. The screen glowed with incriminating files, bank transfers, encrypted emails, and recordings. He moved $8.7 million from internal accounts to shell companies in the Caymans, Julian explained, all tied to private defense contractors. Amara nodded, her face steady. This isn't just divorce. This is prosecution. Julian studied her. If you push this far, it won't end clean. He'll fight. He'll bleed. I don't need him to let me live, she answered, her voice like a gavel striking. I need justice. Not for me, for the child who never got to breathe. My baby deserved a world that knew right from wrong. If I don't carve that line, then what's left of me means nothing. 3 days later, she filed the divorce petition. Headlines spread like wildfire. Wife of tech CEO Ethan Caldwell files for divorce after health scare sources cite controversial pool incident. Ethan called. She didn't answer. He emailed. She forwarded them to Julian. Then she opened her laptop, and with 3 clicks, she unleashed everything. Bloomberg investigations, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the U.S. Department of Justice, subject line, Caldwell Systems, internal transactions, defense contract, manipulation, and ethical breaches. No name, no signature, just truth. Within a week, Caldwell Systems stock plummeted 27% in 48 hours. Ethan was subpoenaed. A joint federal probe opened. Sierra disappeared from Chicago without a trace. And Amara? She stepped into the light on her own terms. For the first time, not as the billionaire's wife, but as founder of a new foundation for women of color, those scarred by emotional, financial, and psychological abuse at the hands of powerful men. The foundation's name, the surviving sound. Her first words to the world. I once loved a powerful man. I once believed love could change him. But I know now love cannot save everyone. Justice can. When the golden microphone of the Women in Tech Justice Forum lit up at Lincoln Center, it was supposed to showcase the voices of polished CEOs and lauded philanthropists. Instead, it carried a name that had already become a rupture in the narrative of power, Amara Daniels. Everyone in the hall knew of the infinity pool scandal, the unborn child lost, and the federal investigation tearing through Caldwell Systems, the company once paraded as a model of private defense technology. But no one knew her voice that night would transform a conference into a referendum on conscience. Amara stepped onto the stage in a plain black dress, no sequins, no designer logos. Yet her gaze froze the audience in silence, as if every word about to fall from her lips was a scalpel ready to slice through the lacquered skin of power. No one tells you betrayal has a sound, she began. For me, it was the click of a penthouse door shutting behind my husband as he left at midnight, never once turning back. The room held its breath. This was not a victim speaking, it was a survivor with evidence, fire, and a voice sharpened by silence too long endured. I once believed marriage to him saved me from hunger. I was wrong. I wasn't saved. I was repackaged to soothe society so that they could stomach the sight of a black woman beside a white tech icon. Her tone was steady, not enraged, but every syllable carried the weight of years smothered. My child did not die from an accident. She died from a choice. From a father who didn't dive when she needed him most. From a system that taught him women like me silent were the sturdiest foundation for empire. The speech lasted 15 minutes. Its aftershocks lasted months. The next day, over 200 articles reanalyzed Caldwell Systems' ethical record. The SEC issued a formal investigation order. A federal review board was proposed to audit all defense tech contracts tied to data exploitation inspired by Amara's call. Once crowned Titan of Control Tech, Ethan Caldwell was formally listed as a target in a criminal probe. That night, in a modest Andersonville apartment far from glass towers, Amara sat on the balcony watching snow fall under the flicker of a street lamp. A cup of ginger tea steamed in her hands brought every evening by Julian Hart. He didn't try to replace anyone. He didn't demand she be strong or pressure her to collapse. He was there, a steady presence with no conditions. "Do you think I'll be okay?" she asked. Julian met her eyes. "You already are. You're living, and no one can take that from you." She nodded, gaze still on the drifting snow. "I'll never know my child's face, but maybe she taught me how to be born again." Julian took her hand, not as counsel, not as obligation, but as someone who understood that from the ashes of ruin, sometimes the gentlest hands emerge. 1 month later, Amara launched her second initiative, Echoes of Silence, a digital documentary series amplifying the stories of women silenced under the weight of power. Within a week, it drew millions of views, and in every testimony, in every frame, there was an undertone unmistakably hers. Not trembling, not vengeful, just clear, like the knock of truth, finally unafraid to stand at the door. Some resurrections don't happen in hospitals, don't need defibrillators or the hand of God. They happen quietly, in the coldest mornings, when you still find the courage to open your eyes and keep living. Amara Daniels woke at 5:12 a.m., as she had every day for the past month. In her small Andersonville apartment, she rebuilt the first bricks of a life stripped clean of Ethan Caldwell, of nights of deception, of the expectation that someone else would save her. She saved herself, through discipline, through clarity, through pain that was no longer an open wound but new skin sensitive, raw, and more accurate than any mask she had ever worn. That morning, an email blinked into her inbox. From the American Civil Liberties Bar Association, a formal invitation to testify at a Senate open hearing on a proposed bill, the Lex Daniels Act, protecting citizens from psychological data abuse, a bill named after her story. Amara sat still for a long while, not in shock, but in recognition. She was living in a new world now, a world where the voice of a black woman, once discarded and betrayed, was shifting the very rules men like Ethan had monopolized. Julian walked into the kitchen, hair damp with morning mist. "Good news?" he asked. She handed him the phone. He read, then rested a hand on her shoulder. "I'm not surprised," he said. She gave a faint laugh. "I am. I never thought my voice was enough." Julian looked her in the eye. "You don't need it to be loud. You need it to be true." That night, Amara wrote a new vow, not for the mirror, not for an audience, only for herself. "I do not forgive evil, but I will not let it lead me. I do not return to who I was. I am the only version that walked through hell and can still love. I do not erase the past, but I will not let it dictate how I stand today." She never returned to the tower she once shared with Ethan, but she passed it every morning on her way to the new headquarters of the Surviving Sound Foundation, now expanded to New York, Atlanta, and Oakland. In every branch lobby hung a framed black and white photograph of an unnamed woman who had survived a story the world never told. Among them was Amara herself, in an old hoodie, hair unkempt, gaze steady like train tracks, taken the day she left the homeless shelter to start her job at Caldwell Systems. No makeup, no pretense, not conventionally beautiful, but radiant, like fire glowing in ash. Beneath it, her own words were inscribed, "I don't need to be seen as a miracle. I only need people to stop underestimating survival." As for Ethan Caldwell, federal prosecutors filed formal charges 6 weeks after Amara's Senate testimony. In desperation, he appeared on national television for the first time to apologize. "Amara Daniels was someone I once loved. I hurt her, and I will live with that forever." A reporter pressed, "Do you think she'll forgive you?" Ethan bowed his head. No, she survived, and I don't deserve that. Amara never saw the interview. She was in Colorado, running a summer retreat for women rebuilding after emotional abuse. One evening, a girl asked her, "Do you think you'll love again?" Amara glanced across the campsite. Julian was helping kids set up lanterns, laughing as he pretended not to notice their pranks. He had no idea her heart had turned toward him. She looked back at the girl and answered softly, "It's not about if you'll love again. It's whether you can love without losing yourself. And the answer is yes. But first, you must learn to love the version of yourself that rose from the ashes." On a late autumn afternoon, Amara Daniels returned to the South Side Community Center, which once sheltered her through years of homelessness. Her first home, though never her own. There she had learned to listen to the silence of others, and how to make her voice no longer afraid. The center had changed. The brick walls were painted cream, and the weathered sign was replaced with bold letters, Amara House. The city of Chicago had named it in her honor, a tribute to her journey from abandonment to a symbol of justice and rebirth. But Amara was not there to cut a ribbon. She met a girl everyone whispered was like Amara once was. Talia, 18, had lived in bus stations, fled a violent father, and been discarded by a mother who never came back. Her eyes carried the same look Amara had once seen in her own reflection, not anger, not despair exactly, but a vigilance so permanent it had hardened into personality. "I don't need saving," Talia said flatly. "I just need to be left alone." Amara sat beside her. She didn't speak right away. She had learned that genuine silence could be the key to doors bolted shut for too long. "You know," Amara said at last, "I used to hate every question people asked me." Talia glanced at her. "And now you're here, asking me?" Amara smiled softly. "No, I'm here to tell you this. No one gets to call you a survivor until you're ready. You're allowed to hurt. You're allowed to be quiet. But don't mistake silence for suffocation." Talia bowed her head. A single tear slipped free, uninvited, unapproved. But it was enough. In that small room, silence was no longer a wall. It became a bridge. That night, Amara lay alone in her apartment. She kept the lights off, the laptop closed. Instead, she opened an old wooden box, a chest of memories no one else had ever seen. Inside lay, Ethan's first note is a torn slip of paper. "You make me remember I'm human." A faded pregnancy test, its faint pink lines still visible. An unsent letter was written to the child who had never come. A fraying necklace once worn daily at the shelter when Daniels wasn't a surname on legal documents, but a scar etched into her skin. She unfolded the letter. For the first time in months, she read, "My child, I am the one teaching you about this world. But in just a few short weeks, you taught me what I had never understood in 30 years. I cannot stop others from hurting me, but I can choose not to keep those wounds as an inheritance. That living without you will always be an emptiness, but residing without standing up would be a longer death. You were the first life inside me, and the reason I began to live genuinely. I love you, always, Mom, Amara." The next day, she planned a vigil not public, not for the press, just for mothers who had lost children to violence, injustice, or systemic neglect. They gathered in a small West Side park, lighting candles and letting them drift across the water. No speeches, only light. Julian came too. He said nothing, only slipped her a folded note. "You're not the woman I thought needed protecting. You're the one who makes me want to keep the human in myself intact." Amara took his hand, not for love, not as a replacement, but for something larger, companionship without possession, a bond unnamed, but strong enough to hold back the dark. One spring morning, sunlight streamed through the third-floor windows of the surviving Sound Foundation, spilling across the wall where a line of burnished steel letters proclaimed, "I was not born to be a miracle, I was born to survive, and to rewrite history in my own name." Amara Daniels sat at a dark wood desk, turning page after page of documents, not exposés of Ethan, not grant applications, but plans for something new. Founding the first institute for African American women's justice in Chicago's South Side, the place where she began, the place where people once looked at her with pity, then turned away when she was no longer the inspiring story they wanted to hear. But Amara never wrote her story to inspire. She wrote it to live truthfully, so that other women would no longer have to survive in silence. Silence falsely framed as sacrifice. At the press conference announcing the institute, a young reporter asked, "Do you see yourself as a symbol of rebirth?" Amara smiled, without arrogance. "No. I'm proof that rebirth doesn't have to be perfect, it only has to be real." Another asked, "Do you still carry the Caldwell name?" She answered instantly, almost instinctively, "No, I never truly carried it. I only passed through it, like a stretch of road. Now I carry the name that carried me through the fire, Amara Williams, my mother's name." On the day Ethan Caldwell was sentenced, national networks broadcast the ruling for 24 straight hours. Former CEO Ethan Caldwell, sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for securities fraud, data manipulation, and obstruction of justice. Amara did not attend court. She was teaching a class at her institute instead, on the theme, "How to Tell Your Story Without Apologizing for Having Survived." The sentence neither pleased her nor hurt her. It was a complete stop, but not an ending. That evening, she returned to her old apartment, now transformed into a community reading space for single mothers. Children painted murals on the walls, heroes in hoodies, women standing tall in the city without bowing down. Julian stood at the counter, making mint tea. He never said "I love you" as a slogan. But every morning, he rose earlier to open the curtains because he knew she feared the darkness lingering too long. Amara stepped onto the balcony, where she once collapsed after losing her child. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, then spoke aloud the words now carved into the wall behind her. "I don't want the world to remember my name because I survived. I want them to remember that I chose to live after surviving." And that, perhaps, is the most powerful choice a human being can ever make. To live among the ashes, not letting anyone else write her story and not asking permission to exist. To live, but to live as a declaration,